Okay, this is part 3. We'll look at the classification of fungi. So, in the book you have on page 313 of a table setting out 4 different kinds of fungi. So, the one big thing that is used to classify the fungi is their method of sexual reproduction. In particular, the structures that the fungi use for reproduction. Our first entry in that table are the ascomycetes, or the ascomycota, also known as sac fungi. About 75% of all known fungi are ascomycota, so a very important form of fungi. In fact, it is the fungi that gave us penicillin. Penicillium, that fungi that grew on that petri plate. So the petri dish of Alexander Fleming, and was seen that that mold was repelling and killing the bacteria around it. So where would we be today without antibiotics? Morels, truffles, lichens, these are types of ascomycota. So the way we know if a fungi is an ascomycota, a lot of the ascomycota is our ground level. A typical ascomycota will again have all of its fungal hyphae and its mycelium in the ground, and then when it's going through reproduction, it'll make often a large above ground structure. And if you look at this large above ground structure, we'll see that often on the upper surface of the structure, the fungi makes these little bags. And this bag is an ascus. And in these little bags, it makes its spores. Then it releases its spores into the environment. These spores get blown away, and they go ahead and they land on other things. So it makes its spores on an ascus. That's where the name ascomycota comes from. Our next kind of fungi, these are the kind of fungi that we would call mushrooms. Basidiomycetes or Basidiomycota. These are also known as club fungi. So whilst this is the image of a typical mushroom, there are many different forms of Basidiomycetes. Both the ascomycetes and the Basidiomycetes have yeasts amongst them. Once again, we can look at how a Basidiomycete makes its spores, and once again we can imagine all of those hyphae making up the mycelium underground, and then when the fungus wants to reproduce, it makes this large dome-shaped, what's called a fruiting body, and we call this a mushroom. And then we often call these things gills, and on the inside of these gills there are these club-like structures called basidia. And this gives the Basidiomycetes their name, also their nickname of being the club fungi. Number 3 in the book, the zygomycetes. Zygomycetes are often what we think of when we think of molds. You can see a zoomed in picture of a mold here. Lots of strands. they are often microscopic. They don't make big fruiting bodies. They just grow in their hyphae, and two different fungi will grow together and they'll meet. They will fuse, and then from that fusion they'll send up a piece of hyphae called a sporangiophore, a little sac at the top full of spores, and then the sac opens and the spores are released. This structure that is formed from the fusion of the two kind of fungal parents, it's called a zygospore. And again, giving the zygomycetes their name. The last of our four fungi, the chytridomycetes. Chytridomycetes are typically parasitic. Well, at least the ones that we if you were to have a picture of a chytridomycete, you might think of a parasitic organism. They are usually aquatic. Some live in the guts of mammalian herbivores, but there is a parasitic version that infects frogs. And this is a frog who has died from a parasitic chytrid infection. In fact, it's had a very large impact on the numbers of certain frogs in many places around the world. So the thing that separates the chytrids, their place of living, typically in the water, even though there are parasites amongst the other groups too, there are some parasites in the chytrids, and their reproductive cells have flagella, likely because of their aquatic habitat. The reproductive structures of the ascomycetes, the basidiomycetes, and the zygomycetes, things like spores. Our chytrids, they have mobile forms. They have their sex cells, their reproductive cells have flagella, and those flagella spin around and they propel the cell through its environment. Now, flagella only work in water, so again the relationship between the flagella of the reproductive cells and the place that the chytrids live is quite evident. Last slide for this section on fungi classification. The book, again on page 313 at the top, distinguishes the different kinds of fungi. It also mentions their distinguishing characteristics, and in that characteristics it uses terms such as septate hyphae and non-septate hyphae. So I thought I should introduce what those terms mean. Septate, a septum is a divide. It's a divide between cells. So here's our fungal hyphae growing, and each cell is separate to the next cell. Cell grows, it builds a wall, cell grows, it builds a wall, and then each of these individual cells has its own nucleus. Another way that fungi can grow is that they can just keep on growing. They keep on growing and they just elongate, and they duplicate their nuclei and elongate and duplicate their nuclei. They don't compartmentalize the individual cells from each other, and these are non-septate hyphae. Non-septate hyphae are what we might call primitive. but the term primitive just means that they've been around the longest. It doesn't say anything about the success or the function of these organisms. They've been around for a very long time. They are very successful in their own right. Okay, so on to the study guide for this first section. What does it mean to be heterotrophic or autotrophic? What does it mean to be prokaryotic versus eukaryotic? What does it mean to be diploid versus haploid? For a fungi, what does it mean to be a yeast versus a mold versus a mushroom? What is unique, and what is the kind of the basis of fungi being separate? It's their cell wall structure, chitin in the wall, and ergosterol in the membrane. So fungal cell wall and membrane structure. What is a saprophyte? What is a parasite? What is a symbiont? That's what add is. Mutualistic. They both gain from the pairing. Identify a hyphae against and identify a mycelium. Identify a septate or a non-septate hyphae. Know what a haustoria is and what a rhizoid is. Know what the term dimorphic means in regards to fungal structure. Be able to distinguish between the 4 different types of fungi based upon primarily the structures and the mechanism of their production of spores. Okay, that'll do it for this section.